In May of 2005, Aruba was alive with the sound of laughter and celebration. Natalie Holloway and her Mountain Brook High School classmates had chosen this Caribbean paradise for their graduation trip, a time to soak in the sun and savor the freedom of youth before embarking on their next chapters. Natalie, an honors student with plans to attend the University of Alabama on a pre-med track, was known for her bright smile and responsible nature. The days on the island passed like a dream. The group of over 100 students explored the crystal clear waters, enjoyed the nightlife, and made memories to last a lifetime. Natalie, outgoing and adventurous, embraced every moment. On the night of May 30th, the last night of their trip, Natalie and her friends headed to Carlos and Charlie's, a popular bar in the capital Orangestad. It was the kind of place where tourists and locals mingled, where music pulsed and drinks flowed freely. As the night wore on, Natalie was seen chatting and dancing with a young Dutchman, Joran van der Sloot. He was charming, confident, and had an air of mystery that seemed to captivate her. The clock ticked past midnight, and Natalie was last spotted leaving the bar with Joran and his two friends, Deepak and Satish Kalpo. It was supposed to be just another adventurous night in Aruba. But as dawn broke, Natalie was nowhere to be found. When her friends boarded their flight home the next morning, Natalie's absence was glaring. Calls to her phone went unanswered. Panic set in as the reality hit. Natalie wasn't just late, she was missing. Back in Birmingham, Alabama, Beth Holloway Twitty received the call that would change her life forever. Natalie's friends and chaperones explained that she hadn't shown up for their departure. Beth's heart sank. This wasn't like Natalie. She was responsible, punctual, and never one to disappear without a word. Beth didn't waste a second. She booked the first flight to Aruba, accompanied by her husband and a few close friends. The journey felt endless, her mind racing with questions and worst-case scenarios. What if Natalie had been hurt? What if she had been kidnapped? Upon arrival, Beth went straight to the police. Her plea was straightforward. Her daughter was missing, and every moment counted. But the initial response from authorities was disheartening. They were hesitant to classify Natalie as a missing person, suggesting she might have wandered off after a night of partying. To Beth, this was unthinkable. Natalie wasn't reckless. Refusing to wait, Beth spearheaded her own search efforts. She printed flyers, rallied volunteers, and combed the beaches, waters, and jungles with a determination only a mother could summon. The local community pitched in, their kindness a small light in the overwhelming darkness. News of Natalie's disappearance spread quickly, drawing media attention from around the world. Aruba, once seen as a tranquil getaway, was now thrust into the spotlight for a reason no one wanted. Beth's heartbreak played out on television screens, her desperate plea for answers resonating with millions. But even as search teams scoured every corner of the island, Natalie remained elusive, her fate a haunting question that hung in the tropical air. As the investigation began, the focus shifted to Natalie's movements on the night she disappeared. Witnesses from Carlos and Charlie's, the bustling nightclub where Natalie had spent her final hours, provided crucial insights. They recalled Natalie, vibrant and carefree, leaving the bar with three young men, Joran van der Sloot, a tall, athletic Dutchman who lived in Aruba, and the Kalpo brothers, Deepak and Satish, who were local residents of Surinamese descent. Joran, then 17 years old, had an air of confidence that belied his age. He was well known on the island, the son of a respected Dutch lawyer and a mother who worked in education. His two companions, Deepak and Satish, were less prominent but equally involved in the events of that night. The trio claimed they had offered Natalie a ride back to her hotel, the Holiday Inn. They insisted she was intoxicated but cheerful, laughing and enjoying herself. However, their accounts quickly diverged when pressed for details. Deepak and Satish alleged they had dropped Joran and Natalie off near the beach, just steps away from her hotel. Joran, in turn, suggested he had left Natalie at the hotel entrance and walked away. But there was one glaring problem. The hotel's surveillance cameras showed no sign of Natalie returning that night. Investigators began to suspect that the trio's stories were fabricated, designed to obscure what really happened after Natalie left the nightclub. The tangled web of conflicting accounts became the first of many roadblocks in the search for the truth. It was clear that Joran van der Sloot and the Kalpo brothers held the key to understanding Natalie's fate, but they were not forthcoming. Joran van der Sloot quickly became the prime suspect in Natalie's disappearance. With his confident demeanor and privileged background, he seemed an unlikely perpetrator at first glance. But as investigators delved into his story, cracks began to show. Initially, Joran claimed he had a brief interaction with Natalie and escorted her to her hotel. He described her as very drunk, but otherwise fine, suggesting she had simply gone to her room after their encounter. However, this version of events began to unravel under scrutiny. Witnesses contradicted his timeline, describing Joran as flirtatious and eager to impress Natalie at the nightclub. Furthermore, hotel staff confirmed that Natalie never returned to her room that night. It became evident that Joran's account was at best incomplete and at worst a deliberate attempt to mislead authorities. Investigators also uncovered troubling details about Joran's past. Friends and acquaintances described him as charming but manipulative, with a history of lying to get what he wanted. Some even mentioned his penchant for partying with tourists, raising questions about whether Natalie was targeted from the start. The Kalpo brothers, meanwhile, began to distance themselves from Joran, painting him as the sole architect of whatever had happened that night. Deepak and Satish maintained they had merely dropped Joran and Natalie off, leaving the pair alone. Joran retaliated, accusing the brothers of lying and implicating them in Natalie's disappearance. With no concrete evidence and no body, authorities faced an uphill battle. The case hinged on unraveling the trio's conflicting stories, but each interrogation seemed to lead to more questions than answers. The more investigators probed, the more it became clear Joran van der Sloot wasn't just a suspect, he was the central figure in a mystery that would grip the world for years to come. The Kalpo brothers were the first to crack under the mounting pressure of the investigation. During separate interrogations, they pointed the finger squarely at Joran van der Sloot, claiming he was the last person to be seen with Natalie. According to them, Joran and Natalie had been dropped off near the Marriott Hotel Beach, a secluded area known for its tranquility at night. Joran, in turn, accused the brothers of lying to save themselves. He claimed they had all parted ways after the nightclub, insinuating that whatever happened to Natalie must have occurred after he left. The back and forth accusations created a whirlwind of confusion, frustrating investigators and shifting public scrutiny between the three suspects. As the trio hurled blame at one another, search efforts continued. Divers explored Aruba's turquoise waters, hoping to find any trace of Natalie. Search dogs were brought in, and the island's rugged terrain was combed inch by inch. Despite the relentless efforts, there were no signs of Natalie, no clothing, no belongings, no body. The lack of physical evidence left investigators grasping at straws. Rumors and theories began to swirl. Could Natalie have drowned? Had she been abducted and taken off the island? Or was her body concealed in a place no one had thought to look? The twists and turns of the case made it difficult to separate fact from fiction. Each new lead seemed to fizzle out just as quickly as it surfaced, like footprints on Aruba's beaches washed away by the tide. As the investigation dragged on, one thing was certain: this case wasn't just a local tragedy, it was becoming a global phenomenon. Natalie's disappearance captured the attention of the world almost overnight. The combination of her youth, Her all-American image and the idyllic setting of Aruba created a story that felt both tragic and surreal. Media outlets from the US to Europe scrambled to cover every development, and Natalie's face soon became one of the most recognizable in the world. Theories about her fate began to proliferate, fueled by a mixture of speculation, misinformation, and the absence of hard evidence. Some believed Natalie had been abducted by a human trafficking ring, spirited away from Aruba in the dead of night. Others suspected foul play, pointing to Joran van der Sloot's inconsistent statements and suspicious behavior. Joran, now a household name, did little to endear himself to the public. In interviews, his demeanor ranged from dismissive to outright smug. He spoke of Natalie with a casual indifference that many found chilling. "I have nothing to hide," he insisted, even as his story changed with each retelling. The media frenzy put immense pressure on Aruba. Once celebrated as a top tourist destination, the island now found itself in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Headlines questioned the competence of local law enforcement, while tourism numbers began to plummet. For the Holloway family, the intense coverage was both a blessing and a curse. While it kept Natalie's case alive, it also invited scrutiny, rumors, and unrelenting attention. Despite the chaos, one question remained at the center of it all. What had really happened to Natalie Holloway? Each new theory, accusation, and development only deepened the mystery, making it clear that the world wasn't ready to move on until the truth was uncovered. As the spotlight on Joran van der Sloot intensified, his account of the night Natalie disappeared became a tangled web of contradictions. His initial claim was simple. He had dropped Natalie off at her hotel and left her safely at the entrance. But as investigators pressed him, new versions of the story began to emerge. In one account, Joran said Natalie had fallen ill on the beach after they parted ways. He suggested she may have fainted or suffered a medical episode, implying her disappearance was a tragic accident. In another version, he claimed she had drowned while swimming and that he panicked, leaving the scene. Each new explanation seemed designed to shift blame away from himself and muddy the waters of the investigation, but the inconsistencies only fueled suspicions. If Joran was innocent, why did his story keep changing? And why couldn't he offer a single, verifiable timeline of events? Investigators also noted Joran's demeanor during questioning. At times he appeared cooperative, offering details that seemed plausible. At other times he was evasive, deflecting questions and contradicting himself. His behavior raised red flags, leading many to believe he was deliberately hiding the truth. Despite his shifting narratives, Joran remained a free man. Without concrete evidence linking him to Natalie's disappearance, authorities were powerless to charge him. For Beth Holloway, this was a bitter pill to swallow. The man she believed responsible for her daughter's fate walked freely, spinning tales while she continued to search for answers. Joran's lies weren't just a hindrance to the investigation, they were a cruel reminder of how elusive justice could be. In 2008, the Natalie Holloway case took a shocking turn when a Dutch investigative journalist, Peter R. de Vries, orchestrated a sting operation to catch Joran van der Sloot off guard. Using a hidden camera, de Vries captured Joran in what seemed to be a bombshell confession. Relaxed and boastful, Joran told an undercover associate that Natalie had died in his presence. He claimed she had suffered a seizure on the beach after a night of drinking, and that he, panicked and unsure of what to do, called a friend to help him dispose of her body. According to Joran, they had loaded Natalie onto a boat and dumped her remains in the ocean, ensuring she would never be found. The footage, aired on Dutch television, sent shockwaves across the world. It appeared to confirm what many had suspected for years, that Joran had been directly involved in Natalie's death. Beth Holloway watched the broadcast in tears, her worst fears seemingly validated. But just as quickly as hope for answers surfaced, it was dashed. Joran retracted his statements almost immediately, calling them fabrications made under the influence of marijuana. He claimed he had been playing along, telling the undercover associate what he wanted to hear. Without physical evidence to corroborate the story, authorities were once again at a dead end. The secret tape, while damning in its content, ultimately added another layer of frustration to an already tangled case. It showed Joran's callousness and ability to manipulate, but it did not bring Natalie's family any closer to justice. By 2010, Joran van der Sloot's name was once again in the headlines, this time for a murder that bore chilling similarities to Natalie Holloway's disappearance. On May 30th, exactly 5 years to the day since Natalie vanished, Joran was arrested in Lima, Peru, for the brutal killing of 21-year-old Stephanie Flores. Stephanie, a business student and avid poker player, had crossed paths with Joran in a casino. Security footage showed the two entering his hotel room together. Hours later, Joran was seen leaving the room alone, carrying luggage. Stephanie's lifeless body was discovered shortly after, beaten and strangled. Joran fled Peru, but was apprehended in Chile days later. Under questioning, he admitted to the murder, claiming he lashed out in anger after Stephanie found information about Natalie Holloway on his laptop. The murder was both a chilling echo of Natalie's case and a grim escalation in Joran's pattern of violence. Public opinion, already skeptical of Joran, hardened against him. For many, Stephanie's death was a tragic consequence of the failure to hold Joran accountable for Natalie's disappearance. Her family, like the Holloways, was left grappling with unanswered questions and unimaginable grief. Joran van der Sloot's life behind bars in Peru took unexpected turns. In 2014, while serving a 28-year sentence for Stephanie Flores' murder, he married Lady Figueroa, a Peruvian woman who had visited him in prison. The couple later welcomed a child, a development that baffled many who saw Joran as unrepentant and manipulative. Meanwhile, the legal noose tightened around him, as authorities charged Joran with extortion and wire fraud after he had contacted Beth Holloway in 2010, offering to reveal the location of Natalie's remains in exchange for $250,000. He even provided details of a supposed burial site, which turned out to be another cruel lie. In 2023, Joran's world began to unravel further. Peru agreed to temporarily extradite him to the United States to face charges related to the extortion scheme. For the first time, he would stand trial on American soil, and the Holloway family saw a sliver of hope for accountability. Joran's plea deal during this process would lead to an unexpected confession, one that would reignite public interest in Natalie's case and bring new questions about whether justice could ever truly be served. In 2010, Beth Holloway received a shocking offer. Joran van der Sloot, the man she had long believed responsible for her daughter's disappearance, reached out with a proposition. He claimed he knew the exact location of Natalie's remains and was willing to share the information for a price. The demand was cold and calculated. Joran asked for $250,000 in exchange for the truth, with an upfront payment of $25,000 as a show of good faith. Desperate for answers, Beth agreed to the initial payment, hoping it would finally lead her to her daughter. Joran provided coordinates for a location in Aruba, claiming Natalie's body was buried there, but the site turned up nothing. It became clear that Joran had lied yet again, using Beth's grief as leverage for financial gain. The extortion plot did not go unpunished. As authorities charged Joran with wire fraud and extortion, crimes that would eventually lead to his extradition to the United States in 2023. For Beth, it was a bittersweet moment. While Joran's actions brought him closer to accountability, it was another cruel reminder of his lack of remorse. In October 2023, during a plea deal hearing in a federal courtroom in Birmingham, Alabama, Joran Sloot made a confession that stunned the world. As part of the agreement to reduce his sentence for the extortion charges, Joran admitted to killing Natalie Holloway. For 18 years, her fate had been a haunting mystery. Now, Joran's chilling words brought an end to the speculation. He described the events of May 30th, 2005, detailing how a night that began with drinks and laughter ended in violence and tragedy. According to Joran, an argument erupted between him and Natalie on the beach. He claimed she rejected his advances, which escalated his anger. In a fit of rage, he struck her, leading to her death. His tone as he recounted the events was detached, almost clinical, a stark contrast to the gravity of his actions. The courtroom was silent as Joran revealed what had long been suspected. For the Holloway family, it was a moment of both closure and heartbreak. They finally knew what had happened to Natalie, but the cost of hearing it was immeasurable. Joran's confession included details that were as horrifying as they were revealing. He admitted to striking Natalie with a cinder block after she rejected his advances, an act of violence that ended her life in an instant. His explanation lacked any sense of remorse, delivered with an almost robotic precision. He went on to describe how he disposed of Natalie's body, dragging her into the ocean and letting the waves carry her away. This, he claimed, was why her remains were never found. It was a calculated move to erase any trace of her existence, leaving her family to grapple with unanswered questions for nearly 2 decades. Yet, even with his confession, questions lingered. Was Joran's account entirely truthful, or was he omitting key details to minimize his culpability? Had he acted alone, or had others helped him cover up the crime? And perhaps most disturbingly, what drove him to commit such a heinous act in the first place? Joran's chilling admission closed one chapter of Natalie Holloway's story, but left many wondering if justice, even after all these years, had truly been served. Joran Sloot's confession in October 2023 came nearly 2 decades after Natalie Holloway's disappearance. The timing of his admission raised as many questions as the confession itself. Why now? Some legal experts and observers believed the answer lay in self-preservation. By confessing, Joran secured a plea deal that reduced his sentence for extortion and wire fraud charges in the U.S. It was a calculated move, ensuring he avoided harsher penalties while appearing cooperative. His history of manipulation and deceit only reinforced suspicions that the confession was motivated by pragmatism, not remorse. Others speculated that the weight of his crimes had finally caught up with him. Years in a Peruvian prison, a murder conviction, and the looming pressure of extradition may have broken the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for years. Perhaps Joran saw the confession as a way to unburden himself or to craft a narrative that would paint him as less monstrous than he appeared. Yet, even with his admission, the truth remained elusive. Joran's motives, like the murky waters where he claimed Natalie's body was discarded, were difficult to decipher. Was this an act of convenience, desperation, or genuine remorse? For many, the confession raised more doubts than it resolved. For Beth Holloway, the confession was both a relief and a source of renewed pain. After 18 years of searching for answers, she finally knew what had happened to her daughter. But the knowledge came at a steep emotional cost. Speaking to the press shortly after the confession, Beth called it justice in its most basic form. While Joran's admission brought an end to the mystery, it provided little comfort. Natalie's remains were still missing, leaving the Holloway family without the closure they had hoped for. The emotional toll of the case was immeasurable. For nearly 2 decades, Beth had been a relentless advocate, fighting for answers while carrying the weight of her grief. Joran's confession, though validating her suspicions, reopened old wounds and left her grappling with the cold reality of Natalie's fate. As the world processed the news, Beth expressed gratitude to those who had supported her over the years. Yet her heartbreak was evident. Justice, she reminded everyone, was never complete without accountability and without Natalie. Joran van der Sloot's confession and plea deal sparked a firestorm of debate. While some viewed it as a long overdue admission of guilt, others questioned whether justice had truly been served. The plea deal spared Joran the death penalty and reduced his sentence for extortion and wire fraud. For many, this felt like a slap on the wrist for a man who had admitted to killing an 18-year-old girl and robbing her family of nearly 2 decades of peace. Critics argued that Joran's history of manipulation and lies should have disqualified him from leniency. On social media and in public discourse, the confession reignited conversations about accountability. Could a confessed killer ever truly pay enough for the life they had taken? Was justice even possible when the victims' remains were still missing? Others pointed to the systemic failures that allowed Joran to escape consequences for so long. From the early missteps in Aruba's investigation to the years of legal loopholes and lies, the case became a symbol of how justice can falter in the face of privilege and deceit. For the Holloway family and countless others who had followed the case, the confession felt like a bittersweet victory. It was a step toward resolution, but far from the justice Natalie deserved. The disappearance of Natalie Holloway cast a long and somber shadow over the island of Aruba. Once celebrated as a tropical paradise, the island found itself at the center of an international tragedy. Media coverage painted Aruba as a place of danger and mystery, and the idyllic image it had carefully cultivated began to crumble. For years, headlines about Natalie overshadowed the island's sunlit beaches and turquoise waters. Tourists, particularly Americans, reconsidered their travel plans. Families who once viewed Aruba as a safe haven began looking elsewhere. The island's economy, heavily reliant on tourism, suffered a blow from which it never fully recovered. Local officials and residents expressed frustration, feeling unfairly vilified for a crime they could not control. Yet they also recognized that the handling of the case, delayed responses, inconsistent investigations, and jurisdictional challenges had contributed to the negative perception. To this day, mention of Aruba often brings Natalie's story to mind, a tragic association that lingers despite the passage of time. The island, once synonymous with serenity, became a symbol of a heartbreaking mystery that captivated the world. Natalie Holloway's disappearance didn't just leave a mark on Aruba. It resonated globally, prompting changes in how missing persons cases are handled, particularly for travelers abroad. One of the most significant lessons from the case was the importance of swift action. The initial delay in investigating Natalie's disappearance highlighted the challenges of coordinating across international borders. In response, many countries and organizations began offering better support systems for families navigating missing persons cases in foreign lands. Beth Holloway's tireless advocacy also inspired greater awareness of travel safety, especially for young people. Schools and families started emphasizing precautions, from buddy systems to responsible drinking, hoping to prevent another tragedy. Natalie's story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how quickly lives can be upended. For those who followed the case, it served as both a warning and a call to action, a plea to prioritize the safety of loved ones and demand accountability in the face of injustice. Even with Joran van der Sloot's confession, Natalie Holloway's case remains riddled with unanswered questions. Did Joran truly act alone as he claimed, or were others involved in the cover-up? The Calpo brothers' shifting stories and the absence of conclusive evidence have left lingering doubts about their role in that fateful night. Could Natalie's body ever be found? Joran's confession about disposing of her remains in the ocean offered a grim explanation, but without physical evidence, It's a mystery that haunts both investigators and her family. And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what would Natalie's life have been like had she returned home? A promising student with dreams of becoming a doctor, she had her whole future ahead of her. Her absence is not just a loss for her family, but for the world that would never know the contributions she might have made. The case of Natalie Holloway, even with its partial resolution, remains a chilling reminder of how one night can change everything. As much as her story brought answers, it also left behind an enduring ache, a mystery that will never fully be laid to rest.